Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the previous episode, I discussed something called the deadly racetrack, right? The fact that our youth is involved in this competition, in this race, which is very deadly because it ends in just misery. There is no happiness in this dunya, and there's certainly nothing for them in the akhirah. So that's why at times, you will work hard for something and Allah will not give it to you. The reason being because He's trying to open up your eyes, He's trying to get you off that race. He's trying to make you understand that you are in the wrong race. Now, when we say that, and that's what I explained in the previous episode, the question then is, well, what race am I supposed to be in? If I'm in the race for dunya, which is the wrong kind of race, then what race does Allah want me to be in? Now, the answer to that is, of course, obvious. I mean, that is something I'm sure you all must have heard a million times, that it is the race towards Allah, it is the race towards Islam. Don't chase dunya, chase Allah, chase Islam. Now, here's the problem with that answer. If it's so obvious, if it's something that we all must have heard hundreds of times in our life, why is it that the young generation doesn't want to do it? Why is it that the young generation is willing to get into a race that ends in misery, that has anxiety, depression, fear, but they do not want to get into a separate kind of race where you're telling them there's happiness, there's peace, there's contentment, there is success in this life and the next, but they just don't want to get into that race? What's the reason? Especially, the thing that I find very interesting is that nowadays, in the era of technology, you have internet. And on the internet, you have hundreds and thousands of lectures available from scholars all over the world in all different kinds of languages, preaching the same message. And they're doing a brilliant job. But our young generation will go on the internet for other things, but they will not click on these lectures even though the lectures are free. So what exactly is the problem? In my perspective, the problem is the fear of change. And this is something which is prevalent in all countries, but it is especially a problem in Pakistan. It is particularly a problem that the youth faces in Pakistan, this fear that if I start to listen to the Quran, if I start to chase Allah and move towards Islam, I'm going to have to change myself entirely. I'm going to have to move away from dunya because apparently everything in dunya happens to be haram. Everything that I like happens to be haram, and things that I don't like happen to be halal. And the reason I say this is particularly a problem in Pakistan is because, unfortunately, there are some scholars in Pakistan who are doing a brilliant job. But there are many people in Pakistan who are trying to spread the message of Islam. They are not necessarily scholars, but they're people who are just sharing their knowledge, very similar to me. Okay, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a scholar, I'm just sharing my knowledge. But unfortunately, when they share their knowledge, they spread this image of Islam as being something very strict, something very dull and very boring. And, it's a religion where 99.9% of the things that you actually like are haram. And there's only 0.1% of things that you don't like, and those things happen to be halal. And so there's this fear that I don't want to move towards Islam because if I do, I'll have to move away from dunya. I'll have to stop doing all those things in dunya that I like to do, and I don't want to do that. And this is one of the biggest problems that our generation faces. So this episode is dedicated to making you understand that all of that is not true. Islam does not tell you to change yourself. Islam does not tell you to move away from dunya. And Islam does not tell you that 99.9% of the things that you like are haram. All of that is actually false. Now, to make you understand that, I want to give you a small lesson in history. When you look at Christianity, during the 3rd or 4th century, the church became very powerful. It started to control the entire Europe. And the priests over there introduced the idea of monasticism. Now, monasticism means if you want to connect with God, leave dunya. Everything in dunya is haram. Everything in dunya is evil. Okay? So the church convinced all of the people in Europe that studying academics, astronomy, maths, philosophy, science, all of these things are bad. And any form of entertainment is bad. And getting involved in dunya is bad. Okay? So it's all about praying to God and you have to read the Bible, and you have to be connected with God, and that's all that there is. And this actually is what you call the Dark Ages of Europe. This is the time when there was no economic development, and instead of people being happy and elevated because they were connecting to God, there was massive depression. This, by the way, is also the same time that in the Muslim world, there was this Enlightenment period. Muslims were doing brilliant. They were taking Islam and dunya hand in hand. There was a lot of time that was being dedicated to the Quran, but also a lot of time being dedicated to astronomy and maths and philosophy, sciences, and so on. Okay, so the Muslim world was thriving, but Europe was actually down in depression. That's why it's called the Dark Ages. And this went on from the 4th to the 15th century. And then by the 16th or 17th century, people just got sick and tired of it. And they said, okay, listen, we are not going to move away from dunya. We are going to be a part of dunya. We are going to enjoy dunya. And we really want to gain knowledge of all the academic fields. So they started getting involved in astronomy and sciences and so on. And the church was very much against it. And so the people said, okay, if the church seems to have a problem with this, we are now going to have a divide between religion and science. If you want to move towards dunya, if you want to get involved in sciences, and if you want to get involved in the world, there can be no room for God, because apparently God doesn't seem to like this. And if you want to move towards God, then you have to abstain from dunya. So become a priest, become a nun, dedicate your life to God, fine. Do whatever you want, but then stay away from dunya. And so this is where that divide between religion and science actually started to come inside Europe. Now this period is called the Enlightenment period because now people are moving towards academics and dunya, and the European economy is booming. But of course now you have another problem. Everyone is on the deadly racetrack. So there is anxiety and stress and depression and an increase in crime. So the point of this history lesson is to explain to you that extremes are always bad. If you say, okay, it's all God and there's no dunya, that is bad. That will give you depression. And if you end up saying, okay, it's all dunya and there's no God, that is equally bad. That will also give you depression, which is why Allah says that this ummah was created to be a justly balanced ummah. And that's what He uses in the Quran. This is the term He uses in the Quran. You're not meant to choose extremes. You're meant to create a balance. And monasticism, this idea that, okay, if you want to pray to God, that means everything in dunya is bad, so just stay away from it. Allah explains in the Quran, it's beautiful in Surah 57, verse 27, you can check this yourself. He is addressing the people who believe in Jesus. In other words, He's addressing the Christians, and He says that the monasticism was something they invented. We did not prescribe it. At no point does Allah say all of dunya is bad, so stay away from it. Just sit in your room and do zikr all day because that's what Allah loves. That's actually very, very incorrect, and that is far from the truth. So what exactly does it mean to have a justly balanced ummah? Balance your time between dunya and deen. Balance the amount of time that you dedicate towards education and your career and your job and your friends, and the amount of time you spend studying the Quran and doing good deeds, going out of your way to struggle in the cause of Allah, helping poor people. You have to create a balance in that. If you are spending way too much time in your education, in your career, with your friends, enjoying yourself, and you have minimal time for the Quran, and by minimal, that's like 10, 15 minutes, not even more than that, and you don't even have time for 5-time prayers, then you're eventually on that deadly racetrack which ends in anxiety and depression. You will be one of those people who say, I seem to be doing good in dunya, but for some reason I have a lot of anxiety. For some reason I have a lot of stress. I'm always stressed out. On the other hand, if you're someone who says that, okay, it's all about sitting at home, that's what Allah loves, do zikr the entire day. Don't do anything for entertainment purposes. Don't do anything like spending time with friends or joking around or having a sense of humor, because all of that is just a waste of time. Then that will also end in depression, because that's not what Allah is saying. Let me explain it to you in very simple ways. The idea in Islam is that Islam is a big circle, and inside that circle there is something called dunya. Dunya is actually part of Islam. You're not supposed to run away from it at all. On the contrary, you have to be involved in dunya, but put on your lenses of Islam so that you're looking at everything from an Islamic perspective. Let me explain what that means. Sometimes when you go out in the daytime and it's very, very bright, and then you put on your sunglasses, and wherever you look, it's the color of everything is different. Things are not as bright anymore because you're looking at it through your sunglasses. In the same way, the idea is be involved in dunya, do the same things you were doing before. No one's asking you now that to chase Allah means run away from dunya. Do the same things that you were doing before, but put on the lens or the sunglasses of Islam so that you're looking at it from the perspective of Islam. Now, what does that mean? You want to go out with friends? That's perfectly fine. Chasing Allah, chasing Islam does not mean you cannot go out with friends. That is haram. It's not. The only thing is that now look at it from the perspective of Islam. Check your dressing. Are you dressed indecently? If you are, then dress decently. Check out the place that you're going. Are you going somewhere where there's a lot of, there's drugs, there's alcohol, there's all kinds of wrong and evil things happening? If that is the case, then you can still go out. Just change your environment. Go somewhere else. Go somewhere where you don't have all of these things. Allah's not saying don't spend time with your friends. Just check the environment. Check your dressing. Okay, and then check the kind of things that you want to talk or discuss with your friends. Do you want to spend hours gossiping or backbiting? Do you want to spend hours cracking filthy jokes, especially about, members of the opposite sex? If that's the case, then still go out with your friends. Just change the things that you normally talk about. There are many jokes that you can crack, which are actually decent. Jokes do not have to be indecent. There are many things that you can discuss or that you can talk about which are actually do not involve backbiting or gossiping. You can have genuinely a very good time with your friends without having transgressed any of the boundaries that Allah has set. That is Islam. It is not Islam versus dunya. That's wrong. The battle is not between Islam and dunya. The battle is between the amount of time you spend in dunya and the amount of time you spend reflecting on the Quran. That is the battle. That's where you have to keep a balance, because if you spend too much time on one side, you're giving too less time to the other side. Okay? But Islam has dunya involved in it. Dunya is inside Islam. You don't have to say bye-bye to dunya if you want to move towards Islam. You don't have to change yourself. Everything in dunya is not actually haram at all. In fact, when you study the Quran, you realize that there is only a couple of things that are haram. The majority of things are actually halal. Allah has set boundaries for you, and He's telling you stay inside those boundaries. But within those boundaries, there's complete freedom. Okay, so this fear of change, this fear of Islam, this fear of what's going to happen to you if you start to chase Allah, and you'll have to become this dull, boring, a weird person who nobody wants to be with. That's actually not true at all, because that's a wrong depiction of Islam. And I'll just end by giving you examples of the beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, to prove to you that dunya, entertainment, having fun with friends is not haram. Chasing Allah does not mean you cannot do these things. We know that the Prophet, peace be upon him, at times used to love racing with his wife. Now, he's not racing in his house because, they had small houses that were mud houses. You could not exactly race in there. He's not racing outside in front of everyone where, there's a crowd that's cheering them on. He's going to some secluded place and he wants to race with his wife. Now, why is he racing? It's just to have fun. It's just entertainment. Nowadays, if you had a teacher or a scholar of Islam who was doing this, we would say, oh, he's wasting his time. He needs to spend every second doing the zikr of Allah. That is actually not true. If you're enjoying with your friends, but you are watching the boundaries of Allah and you are making sure that you don't transgress, that is actually considered also an ibadat of Allah. It is actually considered part of the zikr of Allah because you are aware of Allah's boundaries and you don't want to transgress them. You want to enjoy while being inside those boundaries. Right? At the same time, we also know that when the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to go to do Fajr prayer in the mosque, sometimes he wouldn't come back. He would stay there for a prolonged period of time, just talking with the other Sahabas and just, remembering the days of the past and just laughing. And again, it's not a waste of time. It's entertainment and it's perfectly allowed as long as you're not transgressing. We also know that the Prophet used to love, he had a great sense of humor. He loved to joke as well. At one time there was this old woman who came up to him and, she asked the Prophet, can you please pray that I am able to enter Jannah? And the Prophet said, old women cannot enter Jannah. So the woman turned around and she was crying. And the Prophet told her that, listen, when you enter Jannah, you won't enter as an old woman, you'll enter as a young woman. You'll be given a young body. The idea being that it's not like, you can go to Jannah and say, okay, Allah, Jannah is amazing, but I have arthritis. I have all kinds of health and disease. I have so many problems, I cannot even run around and enjoy Jannah. You'll be given a young body. So the idea is that please do not run away from Allah and Islam and the Quran just because, especially in Pakistan, people have this depiction of Islam as being something which is very, very strict. Everything is haram and you are constantly being judged. I don't know why that has started off in Pakistan, but it's completely wrong. Islam is incredibly easy and actually very, very enjoyable. May Allah grant us all guidance. May Allah allow the nur of the Quran to penetrate into our hearts. May Allah forgive us all of our sins. And may Allah help us to spread the message of truth to as many people as we can. Assalamu alaikum.